and he was in the United States Navy. And we'll begin our interview now. Uh, Fred, before the war, tell me what kind of work were you doing, and leading up to the war?
Uh, I was an electrician's helper at the Dictaphone Corporation in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Uh, Prior to that, I had gone to the Connecticut State Trade School for 3 years to learn my trade. And when I graduated from there, I got the job at Dictaphone Corporation. I worked there for about a year and a half prior to being inducted into the United States Navy.
So at home now, talk about where were you raised, where did you go to school, and how many siblings did you have?
Uh, Family members, we had 4 brothers, counting myself, 3 sisters, and my mother and father. I went to the Watersville Grammar School in Bridgeport, Connecticut, stayed there through the 9th grade, then went to the Connecticut State Trade School, which my parents forced me to go to because they knew if I went to high school, I was going to play football, and they didn't want me to play football and get hurt. So I went to the trade school for 3 years, graduated from that, and then got the job at Dictaphone as an electrician's helper.
Okay, and beside you going in the service, did anyone else from your family go in the service?
My brother Daniel and I were drafted the same day, and we left for boot camp, for induction the same day. We were transported by trucks to this center in New Haven, and at that point we sort of separated.
Okay, so you from New Haven now. Where were you transferred to? Where did you go?
We went to boot training camp in Sampson, New York.
In Sampson, New York.
Yes.
Talk about your experience there when you first got there. What was it like, and what do you remember of being there?
Sampson was very cold, a lot of snow. We went through the usual boot training for 3 months. After that,
And excuse me, but training, just boot training, but not specific training?
no, boot training for
Okay.
3 months. And at the end of that training period, we were ushered into the parking lot with all of our gear as though we were preparing to leave. And they called out some names, and those of you whose name we call will remain where you are, the others will leave. And then those of us who remained were taken to another area at boot camp in Sampson, New York, and we went to electrician's school for 3 months.
Now, this to get ourselves oriented in date. This is about at what time, what year and month?
This was immediately after being inducted into the service.
Which was you were inducted in the service in August of '43. Then.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to back up a second. Where were you, Fred, when you heard that we were at war? When you heard about Pearl Harbor, do you recall that?
I was working at that time. I was working at the Dictaphone Corporation as an electrician. But we heard about the war itself happening, or the attack, Pearl Harbor. I was working at a hot dog stand, part-time job. And that was, I believe, on a Sunday. And of course, we were all amazed at the attack.
So now, after that was in December 41. So you went back to work and what you said you were drafted. Did you feel that you would end up entering the war?
Yes,
So you kind of anticipated that you might be drafted.
yes.
Okay, so you did your training at Fort Sampson.
No, Sampson, New York. Not a fort.
Okay. So from Sampson, where did you go?
Sampson, New York. Oh, towards the end, I had my orders to proceed. I was going to go to Florida in aviation electrician school, but I became ill at Sampson, New York, and remained there for a short period of time and received new orders when I was well. I then wound up going to Brooklyn, New York, and going to sound motion picture technician school, where I learned to become a projectionist.
Okay, so you're in New York. You became a projectionist. And then where did you go from there?
From there, shortly after that, I was sent to Norfolk, Virginia, to where my future ship was going to be.
And that ship was?
And that was a USS Auburn, AGC-10. And we put that ship in commission. Later, we took it on a shakedown cruise.
What kind of ship is that?
This was a converted cargo ship, which actually was made into a amphibious flagship, which later led invasions, amphibious landings for invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa.
Okay, so you're now on this ship, shakedown cruise, and you're, what would you call yourself, an electrician?
Electrician,
On ship.
aboard ship, yeah.
Okay.
And-
What was that experience like? First time on ship and so forth?
Yes, it was my first experience. We had an incident occur during that shakedown cruise where a plane crashed, and our captain decided he was going to save that pilot. So someone gave the order to lower a boat, and as they were lowering the boat, one of the lines holding the forward part of the boat either slipped or broke, and the boat was thrown into the water, and unfortunately we lost several of our crew members. We did save the pilot.
And so this was a shakedown cruise. This is in the Atlantic, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, it is. Mhm.
Okay, so after that, and if you remember dates, where did you go from that point?
Well, we remained aboard ship. Eventually we then shipped to Pearl Harbor. We went to Pearl Harbor, and we stayed there until our first participation in the war, which would be the invasion of Iwo Jima.
So you're at Pearl Harbor for about how long a period?
A few months.
Okay, any recollection, any memories of Pearl Harbor? Like, for example, did you entertainment, things you did, so forth?
Yeah, when we were given shore leave, of course, we would go ashore into Pearl Harbor and look around. And I had a couple of friends that we went to these dances that were given for service personnel.
Were they the USO dances?
USO dances, yes, that's. And we enjoyed ourselves there, and then we would go to possibly a restaurant and get a nice dinner. At one point, we stopped at a pool room and saw a a fight going on where men were being struck with cue sticks. And it wasn't very pleasant. We left there very shortly.
At the USO shows, were these shows where there were entertainers there?
No, I don't recall any entertainers. There were women there with where you would buy tickets at 10 cents a piece to dance with them, and which is what we did for a while.
At this point in time, are you writing home? Are you communicating at home?
Oh yes, we wrote frequently to my parents and my sisters.
So you had constant communication?
Yes.
So now you're at Pearl Harbor. You said you were there for a couple of months, and then what? You had orders now to head to the South Pacific?
Yes, we left. We left with I believe we left with many other ships, and ours being the slowest ship, which was about 8 knots. The whole convoy traveled at 8 knots.
You said you were the flagship.
Yes.
Does that mean that you had an admiral on your
Yes.
ship?
Yes,
Do
we
you
had
remember who it was?
Admiral and his staff.
Do you
and
remember
Captain
the name of the admiral?
Admiral Harry Hill.
Okay.
Yes.
So now you're heading to the South Pacific, and I would imagine that took how long a period of time to get there?
Gosh, I really don't know. It's been so long.
What was your duties during that?
I was, as I say, I was an electrician aboard ship, and also having gone to that school for learning to be a motion picture projectionist. I also showed movies every evening for the crew and the officers. While the war was on and the blackout was still on, we would show these movies down in the officers' cafeteria or dining room. And after the blackout was lifted, we showed movies up on deck. I had the chief bosun's mate rig up a large screen between the two king posts and paint it white, and I would show movies on that screen every evening. And the men would get there early, so I would get there early and set up the projection and projector, and also play some music while they were waiting, while we waited until it got dark enough to show the movie.
And where did you get the movies, and do you remember any of the movies?
We used to get the movies at Pearl Harbor. We used to go ashore. They had a movie base there, and we would get the movies there, return what we had, and get new movies. No, I don't remember.
Okay, so now you're in the South Pacific. You're first. When you first get to the South Pacific, where did you head? Where did you go? What was your assignment?
We were stationed at Pearl Harbor, which is where we went when we left the States, and we stayed there until our first naval action, if you will call. And I remember stopping at Saipan on our way to, I believe it was either Iwo Jima or Okinawa. And the strange thing is my brother was stationed on the island of Saipan at that time, but I was not allowed to go ashore because we were on our way to an invasion, and they wanted to keep everything as quiet as possible.
Okay, I'm going to. Okay, so let's pick up on you're now probably in close proximity to Iwo Jima, which is the next major battle. Tell us what happens, what unfolded that you recall.
At what point?
Yeah, so in other words, what point do you remember, what are your memories of the Battle of Iwo Jima?
Well, I remember, as I say, we were offshore when the amphibious landings were taking place. We had set up our smoke screen to cover our ship so that we would not be visible for to be bombed. And strangely enough, the entire ship, with the exception of several feet of our smokestack, would be covered in smoke, but the smokestack was not. So we were sort of exposed to bombings. And as far as the previous bombing of the islands, I believe that took place, or was taking place, before we got there. And shortly after we got there, they made the actual amphibious landings. There was another sister ship similar to ours, the AGC-8. We were the AGC-10, and they were the AGC-8, and identical ships, and they handled the landings together. And there was an admiral and a staff on the other ship also. And after that, I really don't remember. Well, I do remember after the island was secured, some of our officers and chief petty officers were allowed to go ashore, and we were not allowed to go ashore. And when they came back, they were telling us stories how they went underground and came up at the other end of the island. That's how much the Japanese were entrenched underground.
Going back to the initial landings, were you able to observe the landings?
I have a picture in my mind of seeing them landing, but I don't know if it's something that might have, after all these years, sort of built itself up in my mind or not. But I feel that I might have seen them. I was on the railing looking towards the island. But again, after so many years, I'm not really sure.
But you could see things happening.
Yeah.
What do you recall seeing and hearing?
Well, of course we heard that. Again, the only thing that really remains in my mind is the picture of the first several waves of Marines landing. And again, I'm not sure if that's just a memory that built up in my mind over the years.
You recall that there were other ships involved?
Oh, there were many, many ships involved in the amphibious landing. Many ships.
Not just landing ships, but there were there carriers and other kinds of ships that you could see?
Again, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
Were there, did you see planes?
There were planes, yes, in the air, taking part in the attack on the island.
And no planes, Japanese planes, that you recall?
No, I don't, no. I imagine the planes themselves sort of held back while our men were making the actual landings to avoid maybe hurting some of our own people.
You saw or realized there were a lot of casualties. Did any of the casualties end up on your ship?
Yes, we had casualties brought aboard our ship. The hospital ships were being filled.
And were you involved in helping, assisting in any way?
No, I was part of the crew, and
But you could see that there were a number of casualties coming.
oh yes, yes.
You stayed at Iwo Jima for about off at the island for how long would you say?
Well, throughout the entire invasion and the securing of the island, and for a little while after that.
And-
There was rumor at the time that it was the photographer aboard our ship that took the actual picture of the flag being raised on Mount Sorbachi. But I don't know if that was ever true or not. We could see the Seabees as they're building that road up to the top of Mount Sorbachi, which probably led to the flag being put in place up there.
Long and short is you leave Suribachi eventually, and the next battle was the battle for Okinawa.
Okinawa.
So now, what reflect on the battle for Okinawa?
I really can't remember much about it. It's just too long, you know.
But you were offshore.
Yes.
Was it similar to your
Yeah, we weren't able to see. I don't recall being able to see much. Our ship had to lay back, so we weren't exposed to enemy fire, and we would have our smoke screen around us.
So that was because you had an admiral aboard your ship.
Right, and we were as part of the controlling the amphibious landings.
Okay, so after Okinawa, do you recall where you went after that?
Well, sometime later we went back to Pearl Harbor, and our ship was being overhauled to prepare for the invasion of Japan.
So were you in?
But we were we were still in Pearl Harbor when the first atom bombs were released, and the war ended. So we never left Pearl Harbor to take part in any mainland landings in Japan.
So when the war ended, you're in Pearl then, essentially, right?
We did participate in accepting the surrender of one of the islands, and our people went ashore and collected all of the arms. In fact, when they came back, they passed out a rifle to any one of us that wanted one, a Japanese rifle, which I took one at the time and later gave to an officer, which for me was just a sort of a pain in the neck having to lug it around or store it or what have you.
So what island was it that?
Whether it was Ayashima, I'm not sure.
In the South Pacific, or?
Yes, in the South Pacific.
So you did go back to the South Pacific?
No, this was while we were there. And again, what part of time I don't really remember.
I see. So now you're back in Pearl Harbor. You hear the war is over. So you didn't get out of the service until 46. So there's a period of time now where the war is over. What are you doing?
We simply remained aboard our ship, did our regular ship's duties. As I said, I was an electrician's mate aboard ship. There was one unfortunate incident that happened on our ship. I forget what part of the whole time, but one of our electricians who was on duty up in the electrical shack up on the main deck received a call for an electrician, and he went charging out the door, grabbed the frame, swung around, and unfortunately someone had left one of the openings down, which led down into the bottom of the ship, and our electrician flew right into one of those openings and was killed. That was an unfortunate happening.
Do you remember his name?
No, again, it's so long.
You were at Pearl Harbor, then you must have seen the devastation at Pearl Harbor. What are your memories of what you viewed at Pearl?
When our ship was first arriving into the harbor, we saw this one ship, and I think it's there to this day with its bow sticking out of the water. That I won't forget. And I believe that was left there. Other than that, I really don't remember too much.
So, now the war's over. You're again communicating back and forth to your family.
Mm-hmm.
Where is your brother at this time?
I don't really remember. The last I know, he was at, as I say, at Saipan, and I wasn't able to see him. But what we did do, I talked to the chief petty officer aboard our ship, and he got a hold of a signalman, and they were signaling back and forth to shore where my brother was, and we were sort of communicating that way. Not for long, for just a matter of moments, because we couldn't do too much. We were on our way to someplace. I forget where.
Okay, so the war is over, and at what point in time do they say you can go home?
Actually, prior to being inducted, I was held back. My employers received a 3-month delay for me to stay because of my job. But at the end of my time, I was held 3 months longer in the service to make up for those 3 months that I missed in the beginning. And that's when we were discharged from. Originally, we were supposed to be discharged on the West Coast, but our ship made its way back to Norfolk, Virginia, and I was discharged from Norfolk, Virginia.
So you're discharged, and talk about going home. What was it like, when you first got home?
Well, it felt great getting home, of course, and the family was very happy to see me. And we were still living on the east side of Bridgeport. My family was there.
So after you got home, what did you do? Did you decide to go back to work?
No, I didn't go back to work right away. I wanted to take some time off, but I kept getting calls from my supervisors asking me, when am I coming back? I said, well, I'd like to take a little time off. I think overall I may have taken around 3 months off before I went back to work as an electrician. Only when I'm back, I would refuse to go back as a helper. I said, I can't live on that kind of money, Well, they gave me the classification of a full electrician when I went back. And then I remained in dictaphone for overall total of 36 years. I started there when I was 19. Our place closed down when I was 53. And I was out of a job.
Did you ever join any veterans organizations?
Later on I joined, yes, I currently belong to the VFW.
And have you ever heard from any of your friends that you were in service?
Service with, unfortunately not. But however, in the last year or so, and to this day, there is a fellow that he remembered some of us from Bridgeport who were at boot camp And he and I evidently were there together serving our boot training. And we're talking a good many years ago. And to this day, we play pinochle together.
And his name?
Dominic, I don't know his last name. And going back a little bit, because my parents did not allow me to go to the normal high school, I went to trade school. When I graduated from trade school, this was not considered an official high school education. Therefore, I did not have a high school certificate. So what we did after the war, a friend of mine and I went to Central High School for 1 year to study to get our what's the
GED?
yes, and we received our high school diploma. As a result of that, after my plant closed down, I was able to go to get a job as an electrical instructor at the Boulder Havens Technical School. And I remained there for about eight and a half years and retired from there at age 63.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Not really.
How did your service and experiences in your service affect your life?
I don't know if it really affected me in any way. It was one of those things where I was glad I went, but I would not ever want to go back again.
Is there anything else that you would, anything that I'm leaving out that you would like to include in this interview?
I think we've covered most of what I can remember.
Well, the part we left out was you, after you came home, you got married and had a family. You didn't talk about that, so why don't we end it with that part?
Oh yeah, okay. As a matter of fact, very shortly after I got home, I met my wife down at the Woolworths shopping center in Bridgeport. She was working there in the office, and we met there, and we started going out very shortly afterwards. And we were, about 2 years later, I asked her to marry me, and which we did. We got married, and we married 62 years, and still very happy.
I think that's a nice way to end the interview.